Hey everyone, this is a follow-up on my two-part series about ghosts. Now, you'll forgive me, I know that I've sort of beaten the whole subject of ghosts into the ground, if you pardon the pun. So to avoid the risk of repeating myself, I think I'll just tell you one of my ghost stories. Now, back in high school, I was basically a drama geek. Even though I'd spent most of my time in the communications lab making videos, I think the people that I spent the most time with in high school were other drama geeks. We weren't drinking, we weren't doing drugs, we weren't party people. If we had a night off, one of us would get the family van, and then the group would go out to the conservation area, and we'd sort of just sit in the parking lot eating junk food and talking. That was a good time for us. One time we went to the conservation area, it was pitch black, no moon or anything. We had the van off. I'm sitting in one bucket seat. One of my drama friends is sitting in the other bucket seat. Neither of us are touching. And we'd been talking about ghosts all night. And usually when I spend the night talking about ghosts, I start to think that I'm experiencing something. And half the time I'll just dismiss that because I think that it's a situation I've created in my own head. But an awkward silence fell upon us, and I can't remember why. But we're just lying there in the pitch black. And all of a sudden, I start to feel something poke my forehead. And I mean, it feels like somebody's taking their finger and pushing it through my skull into my brain. I choose to ignore this because I think I'm crazy. But I can clearly tell that this is a malevolent presence. It feels evil. It feels like it's trying to scare me. But I don't say anything because I want to look cool in front of my friend, but also I'm convinced myself that I've just created this situation in my head because I've been talking about ghosts all night. After about 20 seconds or so of just experiencing this fear of this malevolent presence poking inside of my head, my friend says, "Do you feel that?" I waved my hands up really quick just to make sure that it wasn't them touching me, and it wasn't. I look over and they've got their arms crossed just like I do. And they say to me, "Let's get out of here." I didn't hesitate. I immediately turned the van on and drove the F out of there. I've had a lot of weird ghost experiences over the years, but that was the only one where I was genuinely terrified. I'm hoping now that we're this far along in the Tell Me More series that you guys are starting to realize that I'm not totally invested in every single idea that I explore, and that I can believe something or sort of lean towards belief in it, meanwhile being completely unable to accept it at the same time. I know that's confusing for some of you, but that's what a skeptic is. Somebody that maybe even wants to believe something. Like, I want to believe a lot of the supernatural things that I explore. I want to believe there's a God, but it's the power of the rational side of my brain that makes it impossible for me to just accept things like that. You can't just dismiss an idea because you personally don't believe it, or because it seems silly on the face of it. Especially when we're talking about phenomenon that almost everybody seems to experience. I've seen people who flat out refuse to believe that ghosts exist, yet won't enter a dark room because they're afraid of the presences in it. Jank Bunky says, "The reason for the witching hour being quite spooky is that it's dark, and you're probably a bit sleep deprived. But yeah, you have a demon in your house." You're absolutely right. There's gotta be a litany of reasons why during the witching hour we're more suggestible to the idea of ghosts. The lore with people who believe in spirits is that the veil between the physical and the unphysical world is at its thinnest. And that's when we can interact with those beings the most. Or maybe it's even something within our own minds starts to naturally release in our brain, telling us that it's time to go to sleep. Also makes us more suggestible to abstract concepts. And then also the likelihood of our fight or flight response being lifted, because believe it or not, we've evolved to be at our most heightened when it comes to our senses of protection during the night, especially if you're between the ages of 15 and 25. Historically, that's when the predators would come out, and the men of the tribe would have to be the most protective of the people in their village. Lonely Goomba says, "I'm pretty into ghosts. If they do exist, my childhood home was most likely haunted since pretty much everyone living there had experienced supernatural stuff. But even living there for 20 odd years, I try to find logical explanations, so I still tend to find myself not believing in them despite personally experiencing it multiple times." Exactly. And that's basically my mindset too. I've had similar circumstances where I was absolutely convinced that I interacted with a ghost, but then afterwards my logical reasoning center told me that there was no way that could have happened. And that's the duality of this sort of belief, is that you sort of have to face it even though you know it's not real. I guess now I watch ghost stuff as a challenge to debunk it. I love watching ghost shows. Half of it is because I like getting the goosebumps from those moments where it seems like something happened, but it also satiates the skeptical part of my brain that likes to pick things apart, because I can almost always think of a million reasons why what we saw could have just happened naturally. Also, spirit boxes, in my opinion, have basically ruined ghost hunting investigations. It's like an EVP, but worse, since the power of suggestion is just way too high. Exactly, which is why in part 2 I said, the reason ghost hunters hear voices coming out of these is because they want to. That was the purpose of the purchase. They bought this wanting to talk to ghosts. By the way, the screaming sound on the EVP could be your hand rubbing against the box/mic. Since you move your hand around quite a bit after talking into it, might be best to put it on a flat surface and not in your hand when recording. I'm so glad you caught that. I explained a little bit in part 2 how my voice recorder could have been giving me fake recordings. With how sensitive and old the device is, the plastic casing of it was very weak. Any amount of fiddling I did in my hand could have come across the recording as a screech or a voice or something. And like I said, the way that the device records on the lowest sensitivity is that when you hit record, it's supposed to stop recording if it doesn't hear any noise. But then if it hears something, it records it, and then when the noise goes away, it stops recording it. And it does that over and over again and mashes all the sounds together into one long sentence. And most of the recordings that we got didn't really convince me, I gotta be honest. The screams, I just assumed were either an electromagnetic field screwing with the diaphragm in the microphone, or it could have been my refrigerator, might have been too loud. It could have also have been the sound of the fan on my laptop that was right next to me. I also suggested that it's possible that it's giving me the feedback from old recordings, because that device has an onboard hard drive and it just keeps recording over the same voices over and over and over again. So the person that I bought it from might have preloaded the first like 20 minutes of tape with fake demonic sound. Unless something extremely clear came through that recording, then I'm not actually going to trust it. But that being said, Lucifer, Prince of Darkness.
Tell me your name.
That's all I can hear when I listen to that recording. The reason I bought it for like 600 or 800 bucks is because the person who sold it knew that ghost hunters liked to buy it. And likely, he himself purchased it as a ghost hunting tool and realized that it was a total waste of his time. Just like I did the first couple times I went out hunting. But here's a funny little anecdote. You'll remember at the beginning of the video, my device had no power. I had just put new batteries in and I put them in wrong. Well, when I finally got the batteries in the right way, it said that I had round about 50 recordings still on the device. And those were all my recordings that I did from previous ghost hunts. And I was convinced that I didn't hear anything interesting in any of those earlier recordings. So if you add that up with all the recordings that I did in the last ghost hunt that you saw, I was around 57 recordings. Here's the weird part though. I had just purchased off of Amazon a special kind of cord that would have connected that device to my computer so that I could get the highest quality possible recordings off of it. And for fun, I decided to take the batteries out of the recorder again, and when I put them back in, all of the recordings were erased. All of them, even the ones from previous hunts. And I looked into how you would even erase all the recordings all at once, and it would take one deliberate button push, one very deliberate turn of the wheel on the top, and another deliberate button push to complete that. And I absolutely did not do that. So I have no idea what happened to those recordings. So unfortunately, the recording from this mic on this device, as well as the lapel mic that I was wearing, are the only two recordings that exist. But I promise you, not a single thing that you heard out of that recorder was falsified by me in any way. My reaction when I got scared at the scream, and when I teared up when I heard Lucifer, Prince of Darkness, those were my genuine reactions to hearing those things. Hysteria says, ghosts are by far the dumbest thing that people believe, in my humble opinion. They are like the flat earth of spiritualism because so much else would have to be true for ghosts to be real. In much the same way as so many conspiracies would have to be true for the flat earth to be real. That's a pretty good argument against ghosts, to be honest. Imagine how many ghosts we'd all be swimming through every single day if they existed. Well, that is a terrible argument against ghosts. Because maybe there are trillions of them. Maybe we are swimming through a sea of them. That doesn't mean they're not real. The enigma with them is that they don't seem to be physical beings, or at least they don't seem to exist physically in our realm. Yet they're able to interact with our physical realm, or they're able to become physical by, I don't know, forming mist in the shape of their body, or manifesting physically so people can see them. There's so many ghost stories that include people not even knowing that they were talking to a ghost, or that they saw a ghost and that they found out afterwards, or well into their interaction that they were talking to something or someone that wasn't even alive right now. If we are seeing them, if they are interacting with them, then they are necessarily physical. So how can they be physical yet completely undetectable? And I guess that's the part of the whole riddle where most people just decide to dismiss the phenomenon entirely, because it's impossible to grasp even what a ghost would be. And that's why we need to invoke concepts like quantum physics, because it takes a little bit of scientific magic to explain something like that. Information is a thing that exists in energy. So they think that there's quantum tubules of this information that get released out into the world when we die, and maybe. But then, does that mean that that energy, that electricity that makes up our mind and our hearts, when it floats out into the ether, does it stay somehow intact? And if that's the case, then does that not necessitate that ghosts are physical? The more I try to reason what a ghost would be, the more I have to accept that they probably just don't exist. They probably don't. The Clock says, alright, so I've got this crippling phobia of hearing noises through a radio. Like if you're out on a drive and the radio picks up static, but you swear for just a second you hear a voice, the mere thought of it alone brings me to tears. So after listening and watching this video, I am genuinely horrified. I'm sorry about that. But I chose this comment because it perfectly encapsulates the feeling you get when you're on a ghost hunt. It's about pushing yourself to the point where your fight or flight response is lifted, and then you ride that. You're not the only person in the world that's afraid of listening to voices through static. That is exactly what is so horrifying about this. It's that anticipation when you're hearing the radio stations flip through quickly and you're hearing all these noises and all this static. You get this anxiety that something's gonna reach out and grab you, that something's gonna yell at you, that you're gonna hear this scary voice or this disembodied voice talk to you from beyond the grave. It's the fear that that's going to happen that makes you believe that every little blip that comes through it is Satan himself trying to scare the crap out of you. When your fight or flight response is lifted, the reptile part of your brain tells you that you need to run because there's a presence. So your subconscious thinks, well, if you need to run from this presence, then there must be a presence. And then by the time that thought process makes it to your conscious mind, you're already halfway through the door. You don't even have time to reason the situation. And that's sort of the point of your fight or flight response, is to supersede your logical thinking process. Just like the same way that your nerves tell you to let go of a boiling pot of water before you even feel the pain. It's almost like there's a feedback loop in your brain. When your fight or flight response is lifted, if you can learn to ignore that fear and ride the wave, well, you just became a professional ghost hunter. It's about the fun, the anticipation, the fear. That's what ghost hunting is. You sort of convince yourself that what you saw was real because in that moment when it happened, it feels real. Letter says, I made sure to turn off the screen every time you subtitled the ghost, and I heard muffled, incoherent noises that didn't remotely resemble any words, let alone the I am Satan stuff you seem to pick up. Exactly. What I was trying to demonstrate by throwing up suggestions for the words every time something came through the recorder or through the radio, I was just riding the pareidolia wave. I was demonstrating how the pareidolia was working in my mind during that time. And full disclosure, it wasn't until about the 4th or 5th time that I was going through all of that footage that my brain started to reason what some of those phrases might have been. And then I went back and listened to that video again a week later after I'd forgotten all of it, and a lot of the noises that I thought I heard came through completely differently. It's like I wanted so badly to believe that I heard those phrases that I forced you to hear them too. And that's what ghost hunters do. Ghost hunters can only put up what their personal pareidolia thinks they hear. And I've heard some pretty convincing sessions with ghosts where even when I close my eyes, I'll hear the same thing that the ghost hunter heard. Sometimes it's impossible to ignore. Again, the Lucifer, Prince of Darkness that I got. I hear that every single time I listen to that EVP. But I revisited some of my favorite ghost videos that I've seen over the years, and I was much less convinced. You know, my second hearing several years later. Justin Y, kind of surprised that this guy's still floating around. Not gonna lie, I thought you would end up playing Plasmaphobia, judging from that title. I chose this comment because it perfectly encapsulates the point I was making about how popular ghost hunting is now. There are so many websites that sell a litany of different ghost hunting equipment. Many websites are extremely successful at it. You can even go to Amazon and buy equipment like the Ghost Box. That's how popular these things are. There's literally a video game now where you ghost hunt using all the equipment that I used in my video. Is that not crazy? It is sort of like we're going through a resurgence of the mindset that people had in the Victorian era. I talked about how the Victorian era sort of turned religious thinking into spiritual thinking. And the reason why people were so obsessed with the dead and the macabre is because the Victorian era was scary. People were losing their love of God and their faith in heaven, but they were unwilling to let go of the concept of the afterlife. And the reason for that is because everyone around them was always dying, and they didn't know why. One of the most popular decorations at the time was green arsenic-laced wallpaper. So many people's homes were lined with this stuff. Imagine how many children died just from touching the walls too often, and then just mysteriously they'd be dead one day. No explanation as to why. And not only were people constantly exposed to these wild electromagnetic fields because their homes and buildings were lined with unfilamented electrical wiring, they were always so afraid that they were going to die that they had to reason that when they did, they'd still be able to hang out with their seance group every Sunday. Garrett Price says, I know he's just playing a character, so I'm not trying to disagree with his points. I'm glad that some of you are figuring out that I'm not really being myself on the Skeptic channel. But the best evidence I can think of to disprove the traditional idea of ghosts is just a numbers game. If the odds of someone becoming a ghost are low, but not impossible, it stands to reason that there are millions or billions of ghosts. Perhaps. And if they can interact with the physical world, at least a few hundred or thousand would find a way to kill because, hey, no consequences. That's not terrible logic, but it depends on what you mean by interact with the physical world. Because some people think that there's only a specific type of spirit or ghost that can interact with the physical world, and they call those poltergeists. And poltergeists may in fact have a limited number to them, and may in fact have a limited set of abilities. Tapering down further, I refuse to believe that there wouldn't at least be a couple dozen instances of a ghost straight up murdering someone in front of the courts, God, and everyone just to flex, since there's nothing anyone could do anyway. What if people do die from ghosts every once in a while? What if somebody's heart attack is because a ghost reaches in and just squeezes their heart until they die? It's not like the coroner's gonna be like, oh yeah, definitely got killed by a ghost. They're just gonna say heart failure or heart stress. There are lots of mysterious deaths that are unexplained that are like that, where somebody has a heart attack but they don't find any real clogging in their arteries. Or even people that die because they can't breathe. Like, so many people just suddenly can't breathe, even people that don't have asthma. What if those are because of ghosts? What if what's happening is a poltergeist is sucking all of the oxygen out of your lungs and replacing it all with carbon dioxide? How would we know what they're doing to kill us? And the concept of them just doing it to flex, well, there's a decent amount of lore in my head, being, raised Christian, to say that there are certain things that God or the angels wouldn't allow demons, poltergeists, or ghosts to do. They would be limited in their set of abilities. Basically, I'm saying human ghosts can't exist while also being able to interact with the physical world, because we would at least have a few solid kills on the books. And if they can't actually interfere with the physical world, then it doesn't matter because they can't do shit. Well, I'd certainly agree with that final sentiment, that if ghosts are real, there is no logical reason for us to fear them. And that's why, even if it was Lucifer himself, Satan, trying to scare the crap out of me in my apartment, I eventually realized that whatever it was I was interacting with, if it was real, couldn't do anything to me. His only power was to scare me. And after I got over that fear, I realized there was just nothing you could do. Dirty Pure says, when I was like 7 and sleeping over at my mom's new husband's house in an empty room with those old rickety window blinds, I was laying there in the dark with my back turned to the window, and the blinds started aggressively being pulled up and down over and over by the pull string. Too afraid to turn over to see who was violently pulling the window blinds repeatedly, I passed out in fear and rarely think of it anymore. That was a damn good ghost story. And as a side note, I find it kind of interesting. I don't know exactly the demographics that are most likely to believe in ghosts, but I've noticed in my time in the ghost hunting community that women seem to be way more likely to believe in ghosts, or at least be interested in them. Hidden Secret says, ghosts aren't the spirits of the living, but are instead demonic entities. I think the exact same thing. Again, being Christian-minded, the Bible says, don't talk to familiar spirits, but also Jesus was the only one to talk to spirits, and every time they were unclean or demonic. And that's another reason why I have so much trouble dismissing the phenomenon of ghosts, because it's something that people have feared for thousands of years. Seppuku says, well, one thing is for sure, ghost stuff has always had me puzzled, and I can never pin down what it is that I believe or why. Same. Welcome to the ghost hunting community. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Next time, I'm going to do a follow-up on my Art Bell series. I'm not going to do a two-parter on that one. That was really just more for fun, for Halloween. But I think that it's still worth revisiting some of those stories again, because there is quite a bit that I need to go over. I hope you enjoyed my ghost hunting two-parter. I can't wait to see you guys next time.
Thank you for watching. You guys know the drill. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please consider supporting Armoured Media through Patreon and by buying our merch. The links are in the description.